On August 18, 2025, a shocking headline swept across North America. Canada, the United States' closest ally and largest trading partner, had halted all steel exports. Effective immediately, the news flashed across every screen, from living rooms to factory floors, sending shockwaves through both nations. For many, it was almost unthinkable. A vital artery of North American industry suddenly cut off without warning. Trucks and ships loaded with steel were stopped in their tracks, engines idling as drivers and crews awaited answers that wouldn't come. For decades, American industries had depended on this steady flow, with steel crossing the border daily to fuel everything from skyscrapers to cars. The sudden halt left supply chains frozen, and uncertainty rippled through every link. The announcement from Ottawa was blunt, citing unresolved trade disputes and the need to protect national interests. Canadian officials stood firm, insisting the move was necessary to safeguard their own economy and workers, even as they acknowledged the disruption it would cause. This wasn't a minor spat. It was a rupture in a relationship long thought unbreakable. For over a century, the US and Canada had weathered storms together, their economies intertwined by trust and mutual benefit. Now that trust was in question. US officials scrambled, blindsided by the sudden cutoff. Emergency meetings were called, phones rang off the hook, and leaders demanded answers. The sense of urgency was palpable as policymakers realized the scale of the crisis unfolding. The flow of steel was more than commerce. It was a symbol of shared industrial destiny. Every beam, coil, and sheet represented decades of cooperation, innovation, and prosperity. The steel that built cities, powered industries, and supported millions of jobs was now in jeopardy. Overnight, a critical economic lifeline was severed. The intricate web of suppliers, manufacturers, and workers found themselves at a standstill, with no clear path forward. For most Americans, steel exports sounded abstract until the impact hit home. Suddenly, families worried about job security, and workers wondered if their next paycheck would come. The reality of global trade became personal, touching lives in every corner of the country. The backbone of the US economy, manufacturing, construction, and especially the auto industry, relied on Canadian steel. From the cars on the road to the bridges spanning rivers, Canadian steel was everywhere, woven into the fabric of daily life. Suddenly, projects and production lines faced an unprecedented threat. Delays mounted, costs soared, and the risk of layoffs loomed large. The ripple effects threatened to reach small businesses and major corporations alike. The initial reaction, confusion, anxiety, and a sense of betrayal spread quickly. Workers gathered in break rooms, business leaders huddled in boardrooms, and communities braced for the unknown. The world's longest undefended border now felt like a wall. Security tightened, and the familiar flow of goods and people slowed to a crawl, underscoring just how fragile even the strongest partnerships can be. The question wasn't just why this happened, but how quickly the damage could be contained. Could alternative sources be found? Would negotiations resume? Or was this the start of a deeper rift? For millions of workers and thousands of businesses, the clock was ticking, and the future looked uncertain. Every passing hour brought new challenges, and the race to adapt had only just begun. To truly grasp the scale of the crisis, you first have to understand the modern car. Each vehicle is a marvel of engineering, made up of thousands of individual parts, all working together in perfect harmony. From the smallest bolt to the largest frame, every component has a role to play. But at the heart of it all, steel is the backbone. It's the material that holds everything together, providing the strength and durability that modern vehicles demand. The chassis, body panels, safety features, and even the hidden components you never see, all of them depend on high-strength steel. Without this essential material, the entire structure of the car would be compromised, putting both performance and safety at risk. Without steel, you simply can't build a car, period. Production grinds to a halt, and unfinished vehicles pile up on the factory floor, waiting for the one thing they can't do without. Automakers have experimented with alternatives like aluminum and carbon fiber, searching for lighter or more innovative materials. But when it comes to the perfect balance of strength, cost, and versatility, steel remains unmatched. That's why it's still king in the automotive world. Today's advanced high-strength steels are even more impressive, allowing manufacturers to build vehicles that are not only safer, but also lighter and more fuel-efficient. This innovation keeps steel at the forefront of automotive design. The entire auto supply chain is meticulously calibrated for precise steel deliveries. Every hour, trucks and trains move steel coils and sheets to factories across the country. Any disruption in this flow can be catastrophic, throwing off production schedules and threatening jobs. So when Canada shut off the tap, it wasn't just a missing ingredient. It was as if the very foundation of the US auto industry had vanished overnight. The impact was immediate and severe. Assembly lines in Detroit, Ohio and the South were all built around a steady stream of Canadian steel. Generations of workers and entire communities depend on this cross-border partnership. The just-in-time model, designed for efficiency, left factories with almost no reserves. There was no safety net, just a razor-thin margin for error. Within hours, not days, nearly every car and truck in America was at risk. Workers stood idle, and the ripple effects threatened to shut down the entire industry. In the end, the industry's greatest strength, its reliance on steel and efficient supply chains, had suddenly become its biggest vulnerability, exposing just how fragile the system really was. Canada's decision didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of months of rising trade tensions simmering beneath the surface. Behind closed doors, government officials debated how to respond as the situation grew more complicated with each passing week. Canadian officials felt the US was ignoring trade agreements, especially in lumber and dairy. These industries are the backbone of many Canadian communities, and repeated disputes had left many feeling frustrated and unheard. New US tariffs on Canadian aluminum were the final straw, threatening jobs and economic stability in regions already under pressure. The Prime Minister called the steel blockade a necessary act of economic self-defense, emphasizing that Canada had to protect its own interests when pushed to the brink. It was a calculated risk, target a vital US industry to force real negotiations. The auto sector, deeply intertwined across the border, was chosen for its strategic importance. Domestic pressure was intense. Canadian workers demanded action, rallying in the streets and calling on leaders to stand up for their livelihoods. The steel industry was chosen for maximum impact on the US auto sector, sending a clear signal that Canada would not back down easily. Canada wanted to show it wouldn't be taken for granted. This was about more than just economics. It was about national pride and asserting sovereignty. The message was clear. North American trade had to be a two-way street built on fairness and mutual respect, not just one-sided advantage. Many Canadians saw this as overdue, a stand for economic independence and a chance to remind the world of Canada's strength and resolve. Ottawa knew it was a gamble, risking its own steel sector and the jobs of thousands, but the stakes were too high to ignore. But they believed it was the only way to reset the partnership, to ensure that Canada's voice would be heard and respected on the world stage. The impact on the US auto industry was immediate and brutal. Within 24 hours, assembly lines began shutting down across Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky. Just-in-time supply systems, once a model of efficiency, became a fatal flaw. Major automakers, Ford, GM, Stellantis, announced plant closures due to steel shortages. Entire vehicle lineups were affected, not just a few models. Thousands of half-built cars sat idle. Robotic arms froze mid-task. Workers arrived only to be sent home, uncertain when or if they'd return. The shutdown exposed the fragility of modern manufacturing. Efficiency had erased any buffer for crisis. The US auto industry was revealed as deeply dependent on cross-border supply. The border, once seamless, was now a barrier. The heart of American manufacturing had stopped. The nation watched, hoping for a revival. The shutdown's pain rippled far beyond the auto plants. For every assembly line job, several more depended on supplying parts and services. Family businesses making seats, dashboards, and tires suddenly had no orders. Layoffs spread rapidly, amplifying unemployment across the Midwest and South. Hundreds of thousands lost paychecks overnight. Families faced financial disaster. Union halls were overwhelmed, but leaders had few answers. Local economies suffered as spending dried up. Small businesses and city budgets took a hit. The crisis was no longer abstract. It was about families unable to pay bills. In Washington, pressure mounted for action. Unemployment claims spiked. Calls flooded Congress. The government's response would be critical, not just for the economy, but for public trust. The shutdown was a community crisis, not just an industry one. Facing economic disaster, the US government scrambled for solutions. Emergency meetings brought together auto executives, unions, and advisors. The top priority: find steel anywhere. The US reached out to Brazil, South Korea, Germany, but global supply chains couldn't be rerouted overnight. Automotive steel isn't generic. It must meet strict specs, and US supply chains were built for Canadian products. No quick fix existed. The deep integration with Canada couldn't be replaced instantly. Diplomats launched urgent talks with Ottawa, shifting from anger to pragmatism. US negotiators, once dismissive, now took Canadian concerns seriously. The leverage had shifted. Canada held the cards. Domestically, emergency aid and loans were proposed, but US mills couldn't fill the gap. Every option was fraught with difficulty. The only real solution: repair the relationship with Canada. The crisis exposed the limits of American self-sufficiency. In Canada, the move was a high-stakes gamble with immediate consequences. Steel mills lost their biggest customer, leading to layoffs at home. The government faced pressure from steelworkers caught in the crossfire. Public opinion was split. Some cheered the tough stance, others feared long-term damage. Business leaders warned the US might diversify away from Canada, risking future jobs. The government walked a tightrope: short-term leverage versus long-term risk. Canada's bet the US auto industry's dependence would force Washington to concede. Negotiators demanded removal of aluminum tariffs and fairer trade on lumber and dairy. With US pain mounting, Canada pushed for a comprehensive, more balanced agreement. The negotiations were among the most intense in US-Canada history. For nearly 2 weeks, officials worked around the clock in a tense, high-stakes atmosphere. The US, used to being the dominant partner, now faced a Canada with real leverage. Daily economic losses in the billions drove urgency. The breakthrough: the US agreed to drop proposed aluminum tariffs, Canada's key demand. In return, Canada lifted the steel blockade. Both sides created a fast-track dispute panel for lumber and dairy. Steel flowed again. Auto plants restarted within days. The Great Shutdown ended, but the scars remained. The crisis forced both nations to recognize their deep interdependence. The path forward would require more careful, respectful management of their partnership. The 2025 steel crisis forced a hard rethinking of North American trade. The US learned the danger of relying on a single source, even a friendly one. Automakers and government pushed to diversify supply chains and boost domestic steel. The crisis sparked renewed interest in American manufacturing and reshoring jobs. Workers saw new opportunities, but also new vulnerabilities. The new dispute panel helped resolve issues before they escalated. Both governments learned that open communication and mutual respect were essential. The border remained vital, but now with greater appreciation for both sides' interests. The Great Shutdown became a defining moment, showing how quickly things can fall apart and how they can be rebuilt stronger. The future would be guided by resilience, diversification, and true partnership.